All right, so we're going to continue to look at the changes in society. And science really begins to change the way we view things as well, which we've seen that before. We saw with Isaac Newton when he discovered the universal law of gravity, we began to view the universe like a machine, and we thought it was logical and orderly, and we could figure everything out. But what we start to discover through physics is that the universe is a much stranger place than we had imagined since the time of Newton. You have people like Marie Curie. The fact that she is a female scientist is a big deal during that time period, but ignoring that, what she discovers is really important. She discovers something about atoms, the building blocks of the universe. We used to think that atoms were just like that, building blocks. They were inactive, inert, to use a fancier word, and you just put the blocks together and it made stuff. What she discovered, she was studying radium. That's where we get the word radiation from. And she discovered that atoms are active. They are not passive, they are active and they emit energy. And so she figured out that the basic building blocks of everything in the entire universe is almost like its own universe itself, with quote unquote moving parts, right? And what modern physics is going to discover, the deeper into this atomic world we go, the weirder it gets. We'll talk about that later on in the school year. The subatomic world is just weird. Now remember, with Newton, we're like, hey, the universe is like a machine. It's logical. It's orderly. And we start getting into the atomic world and the subatomic world, like it's not as orderly as we thought. It's a bit odd. It's a bit weird. It's a bit strange. And then Einstein comes along and just blows our minds away because we thought that we understood the basics of everything. And Einstein comes along and was like, no, our basic idea of the universe is completely and utterly wrong. He figured out that time and space are related. Now, they're not just related, he actually figured out they're the same thing. He called it space time. So if there is no space, there's no time. No time, there's no space. So that means, and this is weird, if there was ever a time without space, that means there was a time with no time. So this suggested that time had a beginning. Science before Einstein thought the universe was eternal and static, that it had always been here. Einstein's theories are suggesting no, the universe had a starting point. That space had a beginning, and if space had a beginning, time itself had a beginning. That also means if you change space, you change time. If you bend space, you bend time, because they are the same thing. Right? And then he figured out that time and space are relative to the observer. We assume that time was universal, that time flowed the same all the time, everywhere, for everyone. And Einstein went, nope, it's relative to the observer. He figured out that sometimes time flows differently in different circumstances. Right? So my time is not necessarily your time. My time does not have to flow the way your time flows. He figured out that certain things affect space, and if they affect space, they also affect time. For instance, Einstein figured out that gravity bends space. And so, since it messes with space, it messes with time. The more gravity there is, the slower time goes. Okay? So if I was on a planet that had more gravity than Earth, my time compared to your time would tick by slower. He also figured out the faster you go, the slower your time goes compared to someone else. So if you stayed on Earth and I got on a rocket ship that was traveling near the speed of light, for me on my super duper fast spaceship, only 10 years go by. For you, 100 years goes by. Right? So when I land back on planet Earth, only 10 years have went by for me personally in my time, but on planet Earth, 100 years has went by, so I have effectively traveled into the future. Einstein suggests that time travel is possible. Mind blown. What we thought we knew about the universe, we didn't know. Okay? He also figured out that matter is nothing but energy. That famous equation, E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. So that means you are nothing but another kind of energy. He figured out that atoms possess an obscene amount of energy. And he also began to think about, you know what, if you could essentially crack an atom open and release that energy, that would be a lot of energy. You could do a lot of good with that. You could use that energy to power electricity, for instance, or you could crack open the atom and release that energy in a weapon called an atomic bomb. Einstein's kind of a big deal in modern history. And then we start really re-examining ourselves, or re-examining the universe. Now we start to re-examine ourselves. This guy named Sigmund Freud, and he develops a process called psychoanalysis. He wanted to figure out what makes us us, kind of like John Locke and Tabula Rasa. He figured that it was our childhood experiences that shape us, but then he also suggested that some of those childhood experiences are so negative that we actually repress them, that we take them from our conscious mind and shove them down to our subconscious mind. So he suggested that we are the way we are in certain circumstances because of events that our conscious mind can't even remember. And so he develops this process of psychoanalysis to analyze our psyche, to draw out those experiences from our subconscious to our conscious mind. Now, much of Freud's ideas have been discredited in the modern era. But what's important is Freud and others like him begin to suggest, psychoses that people suffer from, maybe it's just a kind of illness that can be fixed. For centuries, if someone had a mental illness, you just lock them away, and that was it. They figured there was no cure. But Freud and the modern psychiatrists and psychologists that pop up begin to suggest, no. Through therapy, right, we can help these people. We can cure or at least ease their mental illness just like we would a physical illness, and that's a big deal. The idea that the mind can be repaired just like the body can be repaired. Now, unfortunately, some of the ideas that we developed during this time period are not great. Like Einstein's theories are super cool because it involves like time travel, and that's neat. And atoms moving around from Marie Curie, and even Freud, even though he got a lot wrong, suggesting that mental illness can be cured. All that is awesome. Social Darwinism was horrible. Social Darwinism takes Darwin's ideas of survival of the fittest and applies it to human society, right? And that's super dangerous because they use it to justify racism. What develops in the late early 1900s in Europe and America was the idea that certain races are superior. The idea was the white European races were superior because we had the Renaissance, we had the scientific revolution, so we must be superior. Since we're superior, we're more fit, and since we're more fit, we can do anything we want to the other races, and that's okay, including conquering them. Right? So when Britain, for instance, conquered India and conquered Africa, the idea was, hey, they should be grateful that we conquered them because we, the white race, we're better, we're more educated, we're going to bring them civilization, and we're going to force them to be civilized, and we're going to be like their parent because they don't know any better because they're not as smart and awesome as white people. And if you ask, well, how do you justify that? Well, we're more fit. It's social Darwinism, survival of the fittest, and we're more fit. So you can use this to justify all kinds of rotten stuff. And it stresses the importance of struggle. Right? How do you know who the most fit are if you don't struggle? Right? And so what we'll see in places like Germany and Italy, eventually they glorify struggle, and they even begin to suggest, you know what we need? We need war. That's what we need. We need war to prove who the most fit are. Peace is for the weak. Peace is for suckers. Right? We need war because war makes us better because it eliminates the weak. And then other governments like Germany eventually begin to suggest, why don't we just eliminate all the weak people in our society? Like, why don't we just eliminate the mentally handicapped? Why don't we just kill them? Why don't we just eliminate them? Why don't we eliminate the physically handicapped as well? Because they're weak. They're no good for society. Why don't we just eliminate the other races? Because they're weak. We'll actually speed up the process of evolution. So social Darwinism is insanely dangerous. This is also a time period of great anti-Semitism. Nazi Germany did not develop hatred of the Jews. That's what anti-Semitism means. It's been around for centuries. You go back to the medieval era, and there were occasional pogroms. That's organized mass executions and persecutions of Jewish people. In certain countries, In Europe, Jews could only live in certain parts of cities. Like if you visited parts of the Austrian Empire and you went to Prague, for instance, the Jews in Prague could only live in one part of the city, in the Jewish quarters, and that was it. They couldn't live anywhere else. They were kept separate from the rest of society. So anti-Semitism, right, is not new. What is new is anti-Semitism is paired with social Darwinism to give a supposed scientific explanation of why the Jews are inferior and should be persecuted. Now, this persecution of Jews in Europe leads to a growth in a movement called Zionism. The root word of Zionism is, of course, Zion, which if you read the Old Testament, oftentimes Jerusalem and Israel was called Zion. So Zionism is a movement for the Jews to have their own homeland, which they had not had since 70 AD. The idea was if Jews had their own homeland, all the Jewish people could go to that homeland and be safe from persecution.